Hello proxies, I'm King Link and today we're going to review Eliza. Now Eliza is an interesting game from Zachtronics. Before we dive into it, let's talk a minute about the company who makes this game, and they're a company that's known for their programming games. One of the reasons I really love this company. I'm a programmer by trade, so of course I'm enjoying these games. There's TIS 100, Space Chem, Shenzhen IO, Infinity Factory, Opus Magnum, and Exapunks. Now, they also did make a card game at one point, but here's the thing, Eliza is unlike any of these games. You see, Eliza is a visual novel, and if you've never played a visual novel before, what it means is that you're really just playing the story. You have limited interaction with the story, and I'm going to just jump ahead and tell you that there's very minimal, but we'll get there. The fact, though, is visual novels tend to be about the story with almost no gameplay. There's exceptions, Phoenix Wright and Danganronpa would be considered visual novels, but not at this level. This is more of a storybook. So yeah, the fact is Eliza is all about the story, not the gameplay in it. You play Eliza for the same reason you watch a movie, read a book, like a storybook, or listen to friends, to hear something interesting. And yes, let me talk about the game before we get back to this idea, though. Now, graphically, I don't know. I think Eliza is probably as plain as it could be. I don't know what I'm going to be showing here. I'm going to keep it to the early footage, same time frame as the preview, about first 30 minutes of the game. But the thing is, in almost every scene, people are going to appear and just talk to each other, and that's about it. There's no animation in the characters, literally none. Even when we're talking about like a therapy session, which I'll try to also show, where people really go through quite a bit. It's just a static image of the character, and yes, it takes a little bit out of the experience. Now, what I can say though, and you might not be able to hear it over my voice, but Eliza's voice acting is very good. I mean, exceptional to be honest. It's not many games have this level without a massive budget. I normally will read subtitles to progress a story a little bit faster, but here I just put down my controller and let the game play out as much as I could. The dialogue is exceptionally well delivered, the feeling and emotion of these scenes are fantastic, and honestly, I like these characters just from the voice acting. Honestly, the voice acting is probably my favorite piece of this entire game, but it's definitely worthy of quite a bit of praise. Now, normally I'll just move on to story, but because the story is the core of the experience here, I'm going to move to gameplay and leave story for last. And yes, I always say gameplay is king. I will constantly say that and I still believe it. But I think that's a bit of a false statement for visual novels. The story has to be great to win out here. That's the reason you're coming here. And in most visual novels, especially Eliza, the gameplay here is a bit weak. Now, I'm sure some people will talk about, is this a game or not? And I think that's a question for the genre of the visual novels as a whole. There are, of course, exceptions. I think I mentioned two, Ace Attorney or Danganronpa. But the fact is you're here to see the story, not necessarily change the story. And for the most part, you're not going to change the story. I actually was wondering, and some nice guy has actually posted a Steam guide of all the choices that you can make and the results of them. And while there are a couple choices that will change small amounts of dialogue, there's really only two major choices in Eliza, and they're limited to the end of the game. This is a story that will play out the same way every time. Now, the reason this doesn't bother me personally is more because Zachtronics has said multiple times in their, announcement, their preview or trailer, and their store page that this is a visual novel. You get it from that. Visual novels don't really have many endings or many paths. Admittedly, there are exceptions to these rules, but I wasn't expecting anything. Compare this to something like Telltale Games, where they kept talking about how The Walking Dead has choices that matter. And did they really in that game? Well, spoilers for those who haven't played it, but not at a deep level. As for Eliza, most of the time you have to choose between one or two options. And in fact, when you're doing your job as a proxy, which I'll talk about with the story, you only get one choice. Now, every time your character, named Evelyn, will talk, you have to choose an option, even if it's the only one. So there's some interactivity, but let's be honest, there's a scarcity of true gameplay here, and just be prepared for that. Though, not no gameplay. As you're already seeing on the screen, Zachtronics has added a small mini-game to their game. This is something they've done since Shenzhen IO, and this time around it's a version of Free Cell. I'm going to be honest, I do like this game, even though I've played more than enough Freestyle in my lifetime. It's slightly different, and I've played at least 10 to 20 rounds of this game, if not more. I only play on the highest difficulty now that I've unlocked it, and it's a solid game. It will keep you interested for a short amount of time. Though, overall, it's not that much content. It really is the only true game part of this experience, as the rest is going to be about flipping through a storybook. And I guess it's time to talk about that story. Eliza has you playing as Evelyn, and it starts with her first day of work as a proxy for the Eliza program. The Eliza program is a computer-controlled therapy program with hints of some machine learning, some AI control, and more. And proxies in this context is an employee who sits and read dialogue prompts from the Eliza program for their patients, and act as really conduits. Now, they're not allowed to diverge from their written script that Eliza's feeding them. Literally, they're just a speaker for Eliza. Now, personally, I would think I would want to opt for, forgo the human and just directly talk to a machine. And in fact, the game does reference this in passing at one small point, but it's a great mechanic for us to see what Eliza's doing. And in my preview, I actually talked about Eliza being a name used by the first attempt at natural language parsing. That's intentional. It's clear that the developers is using the name of Eliza as a reference to that as well as a focus of the story. In fact, Eliza even has a few references to the original Eliza program itself. And the video right now should be showing you interactions with a JavaScript version of Eliza. I enjoyed this quite a bit, but it's not really going to make people believe they're talking to a human. Eliza the game actually does make a few references to Eliza, even using similar terminology as you see here. It's actually a clever moment of dialogue when one pops up, and what the game wants to say about the computer interface, well, it's a spoiler, but there's also some really interesting thoughts there. Now, I don't want to go too heavy into the story because of those spoilers, because that's the whole reason you want to play Eliza, but I will say that Eliza becomes more of a character study than a true narrative. You learn a lot about the characters in the game, such as Nora, an ex-co-worker who now makes Electronica, Soren, an ex-boss who's working on a new technology, at least he's promising about it, and, the fact is, Eliza does one big no-no in my book. It allows a character the player uses as an avatar to have some information that the player doesn't have. And the game hints about that information early on. But, well, you see, the thing is, Eliza works well with it. I was more interested in that information, and when I got it, well, it wasn't just a writer being clever to play the pronoun game or something. Instead, it's a character who just doesn't really want to relive her past. Not some deep, dark secret or huge trauma, but rather just a part of her past that she just wants to leave behind. The reveal doesn't happen as a major plot point, but when it organically comes up, it works, and I'll accept that. The other big piece of Evelyn's past is that she was actually part of the group that started to create Eliza. It's a strange piece of the story, admittedly, in that she now works as a proxy for the same program, but again, it kind of makes some sense in the larger narrative. At least I could come up with explanations for what Evelyn is doing as a proxy and why it works. The thing is, both of the past reveals would have been treated as big plot points in other games, but in Eliza, it's just information that you didn't have and that is now somewhat relevant. These aren't big, shocking developments, oh my god, but rather information for you. And in fact, this might be a problem for Eliza. The team at Zachtronics really doesn't take a strong stand on much in this game. There's at least 5 characters with interesting philosophies and thoughts on a wide variety of topics, but the game itself takes a very non-judgmental approach to most of these topics. And I've heard people espouse how Eliza is a denouncement of crunch culture, startups, corporations, or various topics that writers want to talk about. But the thing is, it's not. It really isn't a denouncement of anything. It's just a discussion of those pieces. It's not that Eliza has nothing to say. It touches on all these topics, of course, tells a couple stories, and at least one that's kind of sad. But the fact is, it's just that. It's a writer's story. And so much of the story is left up to interpretation that it can't really take anything as a fact or strong stance without, more information. The biggest thing with Eliza, though, is that there's not really a conclusion that the game wants to make. There's no major confrontation, no 11th hour battle. The game ends with a 6-way choice system where the player can choose which choice they resonate strongest with, and the ending is just a few minutes of content. I actually replayed the final chapter about 4 times just to see 4 different results, and they're all interesting, admittedly, But that's the only thing that changes the ending, just a single choice. The fact is, I do have to talk a little more about the ending. I'll try not to spoil anything, but one character quickly goes off the rail and becomes, let's just say, ludicrous. I mean, I don't get it. They just turn into a bad person because I think the game just felt like it needed a last-minute twist, or to give this character a little more, character, really. And the problem is, you can still side with that person. But my problem with it is the heel turn, like just the craziness, was absolutely not needed and it goes too far. If they limited this change, pulled it back to about 50%, changed a few dialogue lines, there's actually a really interesting reason for Evelyn to side with that person. Now, in addition also, there's a couple acts that Evelyn can take in the final chapter. There's 6 chapters in the game. And honestly, that should have probably also locked out one of the 6 endings. It doesn't. You can still choose any ending you wish because it's a game. I mean, I really don't know, but it feels strange and off to introduce a major change on the final day that doesn't change anything. The game just ignores it if you choose the right option. Now, before I conclude, I do want to say that every therapy session Evelyn has with her patients are really interesting. The least interactive parts of the game, but I was compelled to see more of them and just prayed most of those patients would return so I could learn about them. That's the thing. Eliza has good voice acting, compelling characters, and interesting situations, and it's really strong in all those areas. Now, let me get back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. Eliza can be compared to a book, movie, or even just storytelling between friends because it's mostly a story. This is probably the fundamental issue I have with Eliza, though. There's so little here that changes the story, and there's only really 2 scenes that have important differences for the character that I don't know if a video game itself was necessary. In fact, the video game runs about 6 hours, and I think I could have enjoyed the game if they maybe shaved an hour or 2 off, or perhaps even added an hour or 2 more sessions, because those were the strongest points, I think. Now, being a video game really doesn't do anything positive for Eliza, and I think it takes something away from it because, honestly, this is a mostly uninteractive story, but has some interaction because you have a player. Take away the choices, have similar acting, maybe even get better visuals from a video or a more internal monologue about the locations or Evelyn's view of the world from a book, and it would work just as well. As a game, it is fine. It just could have been done in so many other ways. I don't know if a video game was necessary or even the best solution. Still, I do mostly enjoy myself here, but there's some pieces of it that I think could be stronger. I ultimately give Eliza a 3.5 out of 5. Now, I don't think Eliza's going on my Zachtronics recommended pile, but I don't think it ever was. It is a new and interesting experience from Zachtronics, and I did have interesting thoughts during and after the game. I think the person I was at the beginning of the game and the end of the game are a little bit different, and there's some good issues the game brought up to mull over in my mind. Now, if you want something to make you think after you play it, Eliza works for that, but beyond that, or looking for a game that really takes a strong stand or major narrative, this probably is not the game for that. It's an exploration of the subject matter rather than an argument or a denouncement of some of the topics included in it. Now, that was Eliza, and honestly, it's a fun game. I'll say it did keep my attention about 6 hours, and I do mean kept my attention. I wasn't doing anything else while I was playing this game, and I was really glad about that. I do hope you enjoyed me checking out a smaller game and giving it a fair review. Now, if you did enjoy this review, consider subscribing like always. I definitely appreciate it, and I don't think it really costs you that much, especially with the way YouTube really treats subscriptions. If you do want to see when I post new videos, you can of course ring the bell as you feel. And of course, if you want, like or dislike this video, either way, I appreciate any feedback. Until next time, I'm King Link, and thank you for watching.